The 1930s kicked off with this fragile hope for peace, but one year, more than any other, just slammed that door shut. And that year was 1937. It was the moment when all these simmering conflicts finally boiled over, when brutal new ideas were unleashed and the world's path to a second global war became terrifyingly clear. So let's dive in and see how it all went so wrong.
All right, to get our heads around how it all fell apart, we're going to take a quick tour of the year's 5 critical hotspots. We'll see how that dream of peace died, how Stalin decided to wage war on his own people, how Spain became a terrifying practice run for slaughter, how Asia was completely set ablaze, and finally, how the world was basically forced to choose sides.
So first, let's really set the stage. It's easy for us to forget that the decade didn't start with a drumbeat of war. Not at all. It started with this real hope that it could be avoided forever.
Coming out of the absolute horror of World War I, there was this genuine movement towards global disarmament and cooperation. People called it the spirit of Locarno, this belief that, we could talk our way through any dispute. It was a beautiful idea, and it was about to be utterly and completely destroyed.
Because by 1937, this was the reality. Instead of peace, you had state-sponsored terror in the Soviet Union. Instead of diplomacy, you had the deliberate bombing of civilians in Spain. And in China, an invasion led to one of the absolute worst atrocities of the entire 20th century. Yeah, the dream was dead. This is what took its place.
Let's start in the Soviet Union, where the dictator Joseph Stalin saw threats absolutely everywhere. But his war wasn't against some foreign power. No, it was against his own citizens.
Stalin was completely convinced that his political rivals, so-called class enemies, and foreign spies were lurking around every single corner. So he launched this terrifying campaign to eliminate all of them. What really started as just his own personal paranoia quickly spiraled into a national witch hunt for enemies within.
And the methods were just so systematic and brutal. You have the NKVD, his secret police, arresting hundreds of thousands of people. Most were totally innocent, but torture forced them to confess to these impossible crimes. The most famous victims, we're talking about Stalin's former allies, were paraded in these public show trials in Moscow, confessing on stage to being secret agents before they were led away and shot.
And this number, it's just staggering. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. While we'll never know the exact figure, it's estimated that around 700,000 people were executed. In this insane act of national self-destruction, the Soviet Union basically eliminated many of its best minds and most experienced military leaders.
For those who weren't immediately executed, their destination was the Gulag. And this wasn't just a prison system. It was a network of brutal, freezing forced labor camps, literally designed to work people to death. It was the horrifying final stop for anyone Stalin saw as an enemy.
So that internal terror soon had an international counterpart. Over in Spain, a brutal civil war was raging, but it quickly became something much bigger. A full-on dress rehearsal for the world war that was just around the corner. So the crucial thing to get here is that this was not just a Spanish fight. Not at all. The battle lines for World War II were being drawn right here. Stalin's Soviet Union backed the government Republicans. And on the other side? Well, Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy threw all their military might behind the nationalist rebels.
And then came Guernica. Germany's brand new air force, the Condor Legion, bombed the completely undefended town of Guernica. This wasn't a military target. It was an attack purely on civilians. It was a demonstration of a new kind of total war from the air. And the world watched in absolute horror, seeing this terrifying glimpse of what was coming for everyone.
So what did the world's great democracies do about it? Britain, France, and the United States. They adopted a policy of non-intervention. They just stood aside. And for the dictators, the message was loud and crystal clear. Aggression works, no one is going to stop you. And that exact same lesson was being applied with devastating effect over in Asia. In Japan, an expansionist military elite was now firmly in control of the government, and they set their sights on the vast territory of China.
The speed of the invasion was just breathtaking. It all started with the Marco Polo Bridge incident in July, basically a small skirmish that Japan used as an excuse to launch a full-scale invasion. By August, a massive, brutal 3-month battle for Shanghai was underway, and by December, the better-trained and equipped Japanese army had totally overwhelmed the Chinese forces and captured their capital, Nanking.
What happened next is honestly one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. After the city fell, Japanese soldiers, who were brutalized by combat and fueled by racist propaganda, were just let loose on the civilian population. For 6 straight weeks, the city was subjected to unrestrained murder, torture, and assault.
The scale of what became known as the Nanking Massacre is almost impossible to comprehend. An estimated 30,000 captured Chinese soldiers were executed. But the civilian death toll was so much higher, with some estimates reaching 200,000 people. The world was shocked, but once again, angry words were not backed up by any real action.
And so, by the end of 1937, the lines were drawn. The events in the USSR, in Spain, and in China, these were not isolated incidents. No way. They were forcing the world's major powers to pick a side, creating the very alliances that would define the Second World War.
And this table here shows the two emerging camps perfectly. On one side, you have the aggressors uniting. Germany and Japan had already formed something called the Anti-Comintern Pact, aimed against the Soviet Union. In 1937, Italy officially joined them. And on the other side, the democracies were hesitant. Great Britain was pursuing this policy of appeasement, hoping they could just pacify Hitler. France was paralyzed by political chaos, and the United States was totally committed to isolationism.
And it's not like the aggressors were hiding their intentions. That November, Hitler secretly told his top generals his plan to seize Austria and Czechoslovakia to create living space for Germans. Mussolini, totally defiant, just pulled Italy out of the League of Nations. And in Japan, the government poured money into the military, hungry for even more conquest.
Over in the United States, President Franklin Roosevelt could see the danger. He gave a famous speech warning of a spreading reign of international lawlessness and terror. But he was a man way ahead of his country. The American public was overwhelmingly isolationist, and Congress even passed new neutrality acts to make sure the U.S. couldn't be drawn into another foreign war.
Which brings us to our final, chilling question. Looking back at the end of 1937, with aggressors getting everything they wanted, with democracies totally unwilling to stand in their way, and with these battle lines being drawn in steel and blood across the globe, was there any way to turn back? Or was the world already at war, just waiting for the first shots to be fired in Poland?